council work session. And item number 1 is now digital signs, which is left over from another day. And staff is going to take care of it, right?
Good afternoon, councilors. I'm Janessa Dragovich, Land Use Supervisor for the Building and Permit Services Division. And here on my right is Lydia Kay. She's the Director of the Building and Permit Services Division. And I'm here today to provide you with information on digital signs. This work session was scheduled in response to a council poll requesting to look at updating the Eugene sign code to allow for the regulated use of electronic and digital signs, sign and billboard technology. So first we should cover what a digital sign is. So simply defined, a digital sign provides an electronic message using a digital display technology such as LED screens. If anybody's unfamiliar, LEDs are light emitting diodes, similar to the TV technologies. In doing research for this work session, I found that they are also known by many other names, which can make researching difficult. They're listed up there, I won't read them all out. But in my presentation, I'll be referring to them primarily as digital signs or billboards, although I'll also refer to electronic message centers quite a bit because that's something that we have in our code that relates. So in Eugene, digital signs, including digital billboards, fall under the definition of electronic message center. Electronic message centers are allowed everywhere except in residential areas. However, there are pretty strict standards that govern them. They're limited in size to no larger than 3 square feet, in messages to no more than 5 characters, and in message intervals of no less than 3 seconds. These limits generally work for the typical time and temperature display shown up there in the bottom corner that you can commonly see around town, usually on like bank signs. These limits work for this, however, they don't work for bigger signs. And we do have a LUBA decision that determined that digital billboards fell within the definition of electronic message center. So that's why I'll be kind of bouncing back and forth. That said, we do have a few existing bigger digital signs in Eugene and that I'm sure you're curious about. And so I'll show you those next and let you know how those were allowed. This first one is for the Holt Center. This is a public sign, and so public signs are exempt from the sign standards and the electronic message center limitations that I just mentioned. The Lane Event Center sign, this one is actually over a portion of right-of-way that is controlled by the county. So it probably would have been okay as a public sign, but also it's in the right-of-way and regulated by the county. So the city didn't do anything on this permit. Matthew Knight Arena received a variance to the electronic message center limitations in 2010 for this sign along Franklin Boulevard. And similarly, the Shed Institute received a variance in 2012 for the sign that faces East Broadway. So local sign companies are specifically requesting that Eugene allow digital billboards, as they would like to convert some of their existing signs to digital. There are 7 sign districts that apply throughout Eugene based on a property's zoning and location. And so note that only 2, the highway, commercial, and employment and industrial districts, allow billboards. I'll also point out that within these 2 districts, billboards are only allowed on properties with frontage on certain major street segments. You can see that here, this is a map showing the approximately 130 existing billboards in Eugene. So notice the concentrations along like Highway 99, 6th Avenue, 7th Avenue, West 11th, and then Franklin Boulevard and the southern portions of Coburg Road and River Road. Oops, sorry, went too fast. In Eugene's code, size is what distinguishes a regular freestanding sign from a billboard. So with any sign over 200 square feet is by definition a billboard. Converting to a digital face triggers the electronic message center limitations that I mentioned before. And again, this was confirmed in a LUBA decision, which effectively prohibit digital billboards under our current code. So to allow digital billboards in Eugene, a code amendment would be required. Some of the reasons you're being asked to consider allowing digital billboards include the following benefits. So the digital medium allows more businesses to share ad space and allows for short-term event promotion, so you get greater ad flexibility. Automated remote programming capabilities allow sign copy to be changed quickly and as needed, and also reduces waste from traditional vinyl materials. And also signs can be used to support government messages of alerts like Amber Alerts, wanted persons, or hazard warnings. There are a lot of varying opinions about digital signs, and the main issues or concerns focus on aesthetics, environmental impact, and driver safety. Regarding aesthetics, this is a highly subjective issue related to the impact on a community's visual environment. So some see billboards in general as visual clutter and consider digital signs, worsening that. Some people don't mind them at all. So the opinions vary greatly there. For environmental or sustainability concerns, there's also some conflicting information available regarding the environmental benefits. Traditional billboards generate waste each time that an ad campaign is changed. However, manufacturing digital displays is resource intensive, and the expected lifespan is 10 to 13 years, and they may have higher energy needs from operating 24/7. So it was kind of difficult to really determine what the true environmental impacts were or are on there, but there's claims on either side. Finally, driver safety is probably the most commonly cited concern, with digital signs adding distraction to drivers. According to the Oregon Department of Transportation statistics from recent years, roadside distractions in general are involved 10 to 12% of the time in car accidents, but however, there are a lot of studies that also find it difficult to completely implicate the digital signs. The potential contributing factors from digital signs could include the brightness or glare factor, flashing or changing images, and animations or special effect transitions, and many of those are, it's possible to get at regulations to address those. So other communities around the country and in Oregon have faced the same decisions around whether or not to allow digital signs, and if so, how to regulate them. And looking into how other communities allow digital signs, these were the main aspects that were commonly regulated. Brightness can be regulated by requiring signs to come equipped with automatic dimming technology, and limiting the illumination level relative to ambient light conditions appears fairly standard. Animations and flashing. So while the capability is there for digital displays to do all sorts of motion, from minor animations to full video clips, most communities prohibit these, and our current code already prohibits flashing signs. Hold times, this has to do with regulating the amount of time each static image is displayed. The most common requirement is for 8 to 10 seconds. For billboards, there's also an Oregon revised statute that already sets the lower limit to 8 seconds. Transitions are similar to slideshow effects. They can be flashy transitions that can be quite distracting. So what I found in researching is that those are pretty commonly just prohibited. And you can set the transition time to a minimum or a maximum of 1 second, so it kind of forces just a static transfer. Size was another thing that could come into play more often when digital signs are not limited to billboards, in which case some communities either limit the size of any individual digital sign or the portion of a sign. So there's a couple ways that you can get at that. Proximity. Eugene Code already limits billboards in proximity to one another, so we require them to be 350 feet apart if they're on the same side of the street, or 150 feet apart if they're on opposite sides of the street. Number, again, is this is more of a consideration when digital signs are allowed in general, in which case some communities limit like 1 digital sign per business or 1 digital sign per development site. So there's a couple ways you can do that. And then quality came up too. Some communities mandate that the resolution of the digital sign not exceed a certain, they go by pixel pitch, and where the lower the pitch means the higher the resolution. So that's a way to kind of control so you don't have really low resolution signs. And also requiring higher quality LEDs can reduce the energy consumption. This is also a good time to remind everyone that signs are a form of speech, and as such, the city cannot regulate content. So this next slide, I'm gonna need a little assistance to switch out. This is basically just a short video clip to show what a typical digital billboard looks like as it's moving from one static message to another. I believe this one might be timed around 6-7 seconds per image.
Is this the Springfield one?
No, it's one that I got off of YouTube, and the rain didn't allow me to get out and do much pictures in the last 2 weeks. So there's no sound, and I feel like I should hum to you guys or something and give you some soundtrack, but this is a really typical example of a digital billboard, just to give you a flavor. Okay.
Short.
Yeah. Just a few switches was all I thought was needed. And then when we get back up here, I will move on. Okay. So if you're interested in moving forward with allowing digital billboards in Eugene, then a land use code amendment would be required as they are currently prohibited by code. The first step would be for you to initiate the process. Typically, we would then start with some stakeholder engagement and draft proposed code changes, and then bring that forward to the formal adoption process. As you may recall, the formal adoption process for a land use code amendment involves a public hearing at the Planning Commission level, followed by their recommendation to you in a public hearing that you would hold, and then your action would follow that. And that typically takes 6 to 9 months, so once that's initiated. And so that's all I have for the presentation at this point. I'll do my best to answer any questions, and I can certainly get back to you on anything that I can't answer today.
Thank you, that was very clear.
Thank you.
And I think Alan is on the phone. Is the mayor on the phone too? No, Alan is on the phone. And the other people are here, except for Greg, who isn't here. I have Emily in the queue.
Thank you very much. I'm extremely concerned about this, and I'd like to channel Lady Bird Johnson, who in 1965 worked on the Highway Beautification Act, which was on highways that we don't have through Eugene, but she thought they were visual pollution and actually changed things so there's less of them. Safety is my first concern. We have Vision Zero, and I think allowing these signs goes against our Vision Zero policies. I find them to be extremely distracting, especially if they change in any sort of way. I'm a very visual reader, and if I see a text, I read it, and if it changes, I read it when I should be driving. So I think they're actually dangerous. They're easier to ignore if they don't have light coming through them, and they're static, although I would like to reduce signage as much as possible in this city. If texting is illegal and distracting, then I think these kind of signs shouldn't be allowed. Then there's the aesthetics of it. How much do these bright lights really fit in with organic Eugene? It's okay in Times Square, but we okayed the Gordon Hotel sign, and people were upset about that, and it's not even a billboard, and it doesn't change. I'd rather have us look at the city and the trees and each other. It's better for our mental health, and would show pride in the beauty of our city. I think we have advertising overload. It's everywhere. It's in all print materials. It's on the TV. It's on your computer. It's on your phone. And some of that we have a choice as to whether or not to look at it. But these signs that demand your attention are really hard to not see. I don't think we need more advertising forced on us. It's a method of mind control, and I'd rather make my own decisions and decide when I want to be exposed to advertising. I think they're intrusive, I think they're ugly, and I think they're dangerous. So I would like to know what is the bare minimum of what we are legally required to change, and are there any options for actually reducing the number of signs? Thank you.
Thank you. Claire?
Thank you. So I don't know if you know this, but Springfield allows these digital displays. Do you know how long ago they changed their code to allow them?
I don't know when they changed that, and it's possible that they didn't have a prohibitive language in there, so.
Counselor Clark is indicating
apparently knows.
with his fingers that it was about 7 years ago, which means they did have to change their
They must have, yeah.
code to accommodate them. And I just noticed a new one, actually, on the 105 westbound. I know there's one over by Gateway. And I guess I view them as kind of replacements for whatever material the static displays are using. I don't know what the technology is on the static displays these days, but I'll just call them static billboards. So do we have a limit? So we have a limit on how close one billboard can be to another. Do we have a limit on the total number of billboards we would allow in the city?
Not necessarily a number cap, but there are limits between the distance that they're placed as well as the total square footage, but you have to do kind of a calculation within like a quarter mile, and I think it's 1,000 square feet within a quarter mile. I'm looking at Mike to get a nod. 1,300. So there's a couple limiting factors, but there's not necessarily like a cap at 300 billboards.
If we were to pursue this, and I know Councilor Pryor has an intended motion to continue this towards a public hearing, could we say we will only allow, 3 in the city? And then could we alternatively or as well say they could only replace current existing billboards? Would those be regulatory options that we could?
I'm going to look
consider.
to legal for that. One thing just off the top of my head that seems a little problematic is that we have multiple billboard companies. So if you're limiting to 3, who's the 3? Or, and maybe, whether it's a matter of each one, I'll let you.
Thank you. Janessa Lauren Summers, Assistant City Attorney. Councilor Surratt, I think the answer is, in a general sense, yes, we probably could limit the number of digital billboards. There are policy calls implicated in that, some of which Janessa's just outlined. I'm not aware of a legal prohibition.
So I'm just thinking a different aspect, but in Ashland, they have a strict limit on how many drive-throughs they have, including for food, banks, prescription, and essentially, as long as a business is existing with their drive-through, they get to have that. If they close up shop or change, then that drive-through permit is basically up for, I think, probably through a lottery system. So, yeah, I'm just trying to think. I actually support the idea of us allowing these in Eugene, but I do think we would want to consider kind of how we mitigate the idea of adding more to the visual landscape. As Councilor Semple has raised some concerns, I think others in our community might have similar concerns. So I'm not suggesting that's where I want to start with that, but I think it needs to be part of our conversation. Would we allow you can replace your current static display with one of these, and that's cool, but up to a limit. And then presumably these are fairly expensive to install, and so there's going to be a capital investment that the company would be making to replace a billboard, and they would, I would think, be strategic about how they would make that investment. And not all are, even if we didn't have a cap, it's unlikely all of our billboards would be replaced with digital, but I think we still need to be thinking about that as a potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Thank you. So I have a couple of requests if we do decide to bring this back, and then some questions. So we have a Vision Zero, task force or whatever we call it. It would be great to get their opinion about how they see this and if they've done research into this and what they feel they would like to share with us when we make our decisions. And I would love to see that Springfield code too, just to see what they did and how that's working out. So can you go to the slide with all the dots of where the things are?
Yes, the map.
Yeah. that'd be
Just a
great.
couple.
So my question is, okay, so there's a lot. What is our capacity? Like, is this pretty much all we could have, or is there a large expansion capacity within the code we already have?
This is not maxed out, if that's what you mean.
Yes.
There's still locations that I don't believe this is one every 30 or 100 or 350 feet on one side of the street. And, you know, I think that there's still capacity there. I'm not sure how to quantify that, but
Would that be hard to figure out about what we're talking about? Like, what the bookends for what the capacity is?
I mean, I think it would take a little map analysis and stuff. I mean, I think.
Yeah, if it's like, this would take me a really long time, then that's fine. This is, I was just gonna check. So my questions were, you were talking about environmental issues, and I think that's great that we're talking about that. The current signs are also, they're lit at night, obviously, so, because you would not be able to see them. Can we figure out, if we're gonna talk about energy usage, what their usage is now, you know, compared to what the new LEDs, because I mean, LEDs are said to use less energy, but they'd be on all day, so I'm just curious about the comparison that we're talking about.
I can see if I can find more specific data on that. It is true, it gets a little muddy because existing billboards have often, you know, incandescent lights, lamps that are lighting it up, and they're very energy, you know, hogs. But that said, LEDs even there's a range of efficiency on even LEDs, and so, you know, different sign technology or, you know, quality is going to vary that usage.
And that's one of the things that you said some areas choose to regulate, like what they need to be, okay.
Right, the quality, apparently there's a higher quality LEDs can be more energy efficient, and so that was brought up. I didn't see a specific example of like a code regulation that got at that. It was more a reference to that was something that could be regulated.
Right, and then you mentioned one of the benefits would be the public service messaging. Is that something that's already required or something we could build into the requirements? They have to put up Amber Alerts, or is that something that's already, if you...
I'm gonna look to legal again. It's something that they have at this point offered to do.
Right, I've
So
heard,
it's
yeah,
come
we
up
could
from
let
the offer.
nonprofits use it and we could do Amber Alerts and that's great, but, you know, trust but verify, can we create a system where it's required?
So we'd have to think carefully about how we would craft that system
Yeah.
because, as you know, we cannot regulate the content of speech. So we probably couldn't say, and for 20 minutes a day, the sign has to, you know, be an Amber Alert or whatever. But it is. I would just have to think about if there's a way to draft that.
Okay, I would appreciate that.
I can do that.
Yeah. You know, I work in my other half of my life at a business that uses one of these few signs, the county one at the fairgrounds. And it is a resource we would not be able to afford had it not be digital, where they're able to break up the cost. So you don't have to pay for the billboard constantly. You pay with 5 other people that are paying for the cost. And it's a great option for nonprofits or for, small companies who wouldn't otherwise be able to take advantage of that advertising. And advertising is important to businesses and nonprofits. We can't just think of it as noise and a distraction. And, people wouldn't do it if it wasn't important. So thank you so much. And I would be in favor of supporting Councilor Pryor's motion.
Bruce?
Thank you. A great presentation. I appreciate all the work you put into it. Could you go forward a couple of slides?
Sure.
One more. There you go. These are all the areas where we do have the opportunity to regulate and control what happens. And other cities do that. Portland has digital signs. As we talked before, Springfield has digital signs. Salem has digital signs and have had them for a while. And I'm not aware, maybe you have, got information about the number of accidents that can be attributed to digital signs. Do you have any kind of information about that?
What I can tell you is that it's very difficult doing that research. And I even reached out to a librarian who helped me do some additional research and to try to kind of grok this all. And The difficulty is that accidents are often many factors involved, and distraction is one of them. And so then you take it a step further, and the distraction from a digital billboard versus a static billboard is a static billboard can provide some element of distraction as well. So it's really difficult to tease apart and to blame a digital billboard for an accident. That said, there have been studies in different states and stuff that have come up with potentially increased accident rates in proximity to digital billboards. However, again, it's difficult to completely say that that was due to that there's a causation, from that correlation.
Well, and to get even more specific on it, the accident differentiation between just the fact that it's a billboard or whether it's an LED billboard. I mean, to me, the principal distraction is not that it's a billboard, it's the content of the billboard. If I'm driving by and I see an obscene picture on a billboard, that's going to attract my attention, whether it's digital or whether it's printed paper. So the content becomes a major factor in whether it's distracting or not. And since we can control animations or flashings or transitions, we can manage that to say what is a reasonable level of transition, what is a reasonable level of activity going on. So I'm not concerned that somehow a digital billboard is somehow more dangerous than a regular billboard. And the notion of visual pollution, I can remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, when there was discussion of putting advertising on LTD buses. And there were people who were saying it would be the end of the world. Car crashes all over town if you put ads on LTD buses. It would be destructive to do it. And they fought it for years, not putting advertising on LTD buses because it was evil and it was dangerous and it would be terrible. And finally, we did it. And I don't have a sense that it is evil or terrible or destructive or is causing a whole lot of accidents. And so I'm thinking we can't try to somehow insulate Eugene to always forever be 1965. I think we're in the 21st century and we have to embrace 21st century ways of doing things with the proper regulations in place, which is what we're talking about. So I think we can at least go forward to explore what those regulations might look like. But to resist moving into 21st century technology because we somehow want to try to preserve 1965 is really not practical. It doesn't really work. I worked in the advertising and marketing business for most of my career, and I don't believe I was a participant in evil. I think it's a legitimate form of communication. It can be abused, without a doubt, and I know people who abused it. But in general, I think it is used to help inform and communicate with people, and this can also serve that purpose with the proper regulation in place.
Would you like another round?
No, thank you.
Okay, in the first round, we still have Mike, and then I put myself down after Mike. And Alan, did you want to be in the first round? Wherever you are. Okay, that's okay. Mike, you're next.
Thank you, Betty. First of all, I want to say I'm a huge fan of speech in all its forms, and both commercial and political and all other kinds. I actually think that and always have, that I agree the answer to bad speech is more speech, not less, not restricted speech. In that vein, I too spent a couple of decades in the advertising and marketing communication field, and I may be wrong, it wasn't 7 years. I think it was either 2013 or 2014 when I was the ad agency for a small local business. We purchased time on that billboard on Delta out there in Springfield, the east face of that board heading west of that digital board. They're all static, so the only thing that is distracting about it is the transition, because they're all static. The other piece that I would say is that I think they're a marvelous tool. I think they're a fantastic opportunity for good. And here's the thing, that other than Amber Alerts, there are times when we want the general public to know something, and this gives as Jen was saying, not only small businesses the chance to economically be able to communicate with large numbers of people, because it's going to cost less money than, buying it. When you rent a billboard for a year, you have to pay to have the vinyl art created. So that's made out of oil. And you have to, every time that changes, that's more. This is something you can do on your computer and flash, and it goes right up. Production costs and the production effects are entirely different. But aside from just Amber Alerts and the value of the small local business, we live in a place where we have at least some concern about earthquakes and about trying to be in dangerous situations to be able to communicate with large numbers of people. And all of us have our phones, except when we're driving, when we're not supposed to look at them. And I saw an awful lot of green dots when I looked at that. And I know that over time in this industry, I would expect that to the degree that they are able to, many, if not all, static billboards will eventually become digital billboards. But the capacity to communicate, instantly change all billboards that you could see into the same public message if you needed to, I think would be quite a tool to be able to keep people safe in the event of an earthquake, in the event of a large-scale emergency of some nature. So I think it's quite a good tool that we should look at seriously.
Thank you. We're finishing on time. Just this little side comment, I wonder if there's a limit to how many counselors can have a background in advertising.
Apparently not.
I'll put you down for second round.
I'm just going to make a motion, so that's all I
Well, okay, but I didn't speak yet, and I'm,
Okay.
okay. You're after Claire anyway. Okay, I agree with everything Emily said. Apparently, we're in the, sounds as if we're in the minority. I do think they're very distracting, and I would prefer to reduce the number of signs, total number of signs we have. What I've heard from constituents is complaints about the religious signs that go up every year across the road, and also some complaints about a billboard of advertising one of my favorite businesses, I won't mention it, but thinking it was in the wrong place. And I think, as for insulating Eugene, I think we should try to keep Eugene one of the best places on earth, which I think it is. And one of those things that make it good is a lack of a lot of signs. I had wondered about the one at the Holt Center, and I guess there's nothing we can do about that. Is that right?
Do about it, how so? Not allow it? Or
Yes. Not allow it to move. Really, when it's
to
moving,
change?
it makes you want to see what's next. And that is a distraction.
Right. I mean, it's a permitted sign currently, so it is allowed.
Okay, we would have to change the, and as for the bus signs, they are distracting to me. Sometimes I've thought, oh, there's a building in the street. It looks, some of them, it looks like a whole building when you see a bus up there. But, so I think we should go the other way instead of expanding. And then I have Claire in the second round and then Chris.
How about murals?
Oh, did you?
Sorry, I wasn't realizing I was so close to the microphone there, sorry.
I have absolutely no background in advertising. So I guess I will say that I think, kind of to what Jennifer said, allowing our businesses to advertise and be prosperous contributes to our community being a great place. And in terms of signage around town, for me, the billboards are the least distracting and kind of ugly parts. There's lots of signage and decor and signs out on easements that I find much more awful, particularly those things with the blowers in them that make the little man flip up and down. Ugh, I hate those.
Those are actually prohibited, just FYI.
They are, so I could call those in if I see them, or I did not know that. That makes me much happier. Because I think those are awful and ugly and distracting. But for billboards, I feel like they've been a long time part of the landscape. We've got some restrictions on them, and then pointing to the regulations that you've articulated, I would want to see those in place. But I did, so I am interested in some of the questions that Counselor Ye asked, including if the Vision Zero steering committee or whatever group we have to help with that has any opinion. I'm wondering if you would be able to speak with the city of Springfield and see if they have any data around safety in relation to where they've installed their digital signs in the past several years. And then in terms of the question around requiring or asking the owners of digital billboards to make room for an Amber Alert, I wonder if instead of it being a regulation, if it could be, a memorandum of understanding that says we cooperatively, agree to provide for Amber Alerts and city-sponsored events. I mean, why limit it to emergency protocols when we have lots of things as a city that we think are great, that we're doing, that we want people to engage in. And so that might be another way to get at that same idea of a voluntary MOU that says we're going to provide this space under these conditions. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. There could be a sign that says the city council's about to make a bad decision, go to City Hall.
We don't need a sign?
Chris, you're next.
Thank you. This isn't the end of the process. This is simply the beginning, and there will be lots of additional conversation, particularly about the regulatory opportunities. So I will start that process going by moving to initiate land use code amendments to allow digital billboards and digital reader boards within the city, and to implement the changes to the sign regulations identified by staff that are legally required or necessary to clarify the current regulations.
Second.
Discussion on the motion? I think we've discussed enough. We want to leave time for the next item, too. So, okay, all in favor of the motion? Or opposed? 2. The motion passes. And we're now ready for the session on alley access lots.
Thank you, councilors.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right, are you guys ready for me? Okay,
Yes, we're
good.
ready.
Excellent, thank you. Good afternoon, my name is Alyssa Hanson with the Planning Division, and today I am here to talk about alley access lots in the R1 residential zone. I'm going to give you an overview of where those are allowed, what the standards are, and what could be changed or not. And this work session was initiated by the City Council through a poll that Councilor Semple initiated on, and was intended to provide answers to the questions from that poll. And it was really an outcome of the Measure 49 claim that you all made a decision on late last year. And I'm hopeful that we don't talk about ADUs at all, so maybe it'll be a happier work session all around. So just to start with, this is the presentation overview. Again, I'm going to talk about alley access lots, so I want to ground us, and so we all know what an alley access lot is. I want to talk about where they're allowed in the R1 zone, where there are existing lots, what standards apply, what's the process for changing standards, and then, what else could be changed, which are some of the questions that were in the poll. So just for starters, an alley access lot is simply a lot that either it fronts or abuts an alley and does not abut or front a street. So that you can see this is kind of a standard residential block, and that the green outline represents an alley access lot. Again, only is on an alley. These are typically created from the rear portion of a lot. You might imagine that there was a house up front and they went through a land division to create this alley access lot. So where are alley access lots allowed in R1? In R1, again, just to orient you, is kind of the tannish color, kind of the lightest yellow that you can see up there. Majority of the land within our urban growth boundary is zoned 1. However, there's probably only, a small percentage of that that actually has existing alleys, so closer into downtown. This is my cheeky slide of the presentation that this represents where alley access lots are now allowed in R1. And it's a little slightly misleading because somebody could go through a planned unit development and create a new alley and create a new alley access lot that way, but for all intents and purposes, this is really where they're allowed. They were allowed in R1 prior to 2001, but when the land use code update was adopted in 2001, that allowance was removed. I will answer questions at the end, if you don't mind. I'm gonna get through my presentation first. And to be fair, alley access lots are allowed in several special area zones. Those are the light blue, and they're close in downtown areas where there are alleys. However, none of those particular areas implement a low-density residential designation, so it's not really an apples-to-apples comparison when we're talking about R1. They tend to either implement a medium density or even a high density designation. So this shows where there are existing alley access lots in R1. This is an approximate number, but there are about 66 already existing alley access lots, and approximately 20 of those have not been developed with a residential structure. I can't confirm that all of these were legally created or that are actually buildable, but it gives you kind of a rough idea of how many there are and maybe how many more could be developed that are vacant. This map, of course, shows you generally where they're located. There's some in Whitaker, Fairmont, South University, Amazon, Southeast, Friendly, Far West, and Jefferson West Side. And I just have a couple examples of some existing lots. So imagine you were going over with your drone and you wanted to see where there were some alley access lots. And you can't really see them from the street, so you might not know where they are. This first one is off the Charnelton Alley between 19th and 20th, so in the Friendly neighborhood. This other one, also, if you couldn't tell, they're the ones outlined in blue. This one's Monroe Alley, also in the Friendly neighborhood between 22nd and 23rd. This one's over Whitaker off 4th Alley, kind of between Adams and Monroe, 4th and 5th area.
That's my house. Not the alley.
Okay. I should have checked, sorry.
No, actually, it's up a block.
Okay, okay. Whew. Okay. I hope none of the next pictures are any of your houses either. I didn't actually look to see who lived in any of these. So this is off Jefferson. And somebody else took these for me. We had to wait for a sunny day as well. So I'm not 100% sure entirely where these are taken, other than I know this is off Jefferson. This is Emerald, or South Indian University, and then this is one in the Friendly neighborhood. And then in terms of what standards apply in R1, those were provided to you, kind of a summary of those were provided to you in attachment A to your agenda item summary. And it was also kind of a comparison to what the standards are for prior to the 2014 single-family code amendments and what was adopted in 2014 that now applies. So just to be clear, prior to 2014, alley access lots were subject to the exact same standards as a regular lot. So a regular street-facing lot and an alley access lot had the same exact standards, came to, building height, setbacks, parking space, and then that changed as part of the single-family code amendments. For a little history, as you may recall, some of you will recall, as part of Envision Eugene, that the City Council had initiated land use code amendments to allow for the creation of new alley access lots, along with associated standards to address impacts to surrounding homes. So, to address the height issue, to address looming walls and privacy concerns. As initiated, they were intended to create additional capacity within the urban growth boundary for more single-family homes, and to implement several of the Envision Eugene strategies under housing affordability, neighborhood livability, and climate change, all related to smaller homes. Ultimately, those amendments did not allow for the new creation, but they did include new, more restrictive standards that limit the size, height, and setbacks of the new homes on existing alley access lots in R1. So this is just a list of what the standard, generally what the standards are that differ substantially from a standard lot. The one that really brought this work session to light is the building or dwelling size limitation. And it is quite limiting for lots, especially outside the 3 university neighborhoods. So if you have an alley access lot and you're in Amazon, South University, or Fairmont, you're limited to 1,000 square feet. If you're outside of those areas, you're limited to 10% of the lot size. And in most cases, alley access lots are fairly small. They, the minimum lot size of 4,500 square feet, if you're taking an existing lot and, carving off part of the back, they're not particularly big, maybe 6,000 square feet, but really they mostly hover not much more than 4,500, which would give you a 450 square foot home. So the ballot measure 49 claim, which you discussed late last year, came about because of the single family code amendments, and the property owner of this property on 24th Place, well, off 21st Place, it's on the alley there, sought a waiver because of that 10% limitation on lot area. And they asserted that the land use regulation restricted the residential use of their property because it limited to the size of the dwelling to 462 feet. You had pretty extensive conversations about that, wanted to revisit that. Although the agenda item summary kind of gives an update of where that claim is, I'll just remind you that you ultimately denied the claim. It was appealed to Circuit Court, who affirmed your decision, and it has subsequently been appealed to the Court of Appeals, and I believe that is still pending, so we don't know what the Court of Appeals is going to say. And let's see. In terms of what is the process, so if you want to change the dwelling size limitation or any of the other standards related to alley access lots, it's exactly what you would need to do for the digital sign code. City Council would need to initiate that code amendment. Typically, we would have a formal engagement process, right-sized for whatever the particular amendments are going to be. And then we'd make sure that the draft code was in compliance with state law, and then we'd go through a formal adoption process, which would include a planning commission public hearing and recommendation, and a council public hearing and recommendation. Not actually final action, I'm sorry, you don't recommend, you are the local decision maker, so apologies for that. In some cases, if for instance, in the case of the 2014 code amendments, because you were creating limitations, we also had to send notice to all the property owners as well. Doesn't sound like that would be the case here, but just putting that out in case new limitations came about. And then next, these are the remaining questions that were part of the poll. And so the first one was, what are reasonable changes to make to the land use code for all property owners? And really, I want to put that back to you all, but I want to bring up that some of probably the most substantial things that were adopted that affect the alley access lots really are the building and dwelling size. I mean, putting my professional opinion out there, 10% is fairly limiting when you have a 4,500 square foot lot. A 450 square foot house is not very big. Doesn't allow, probably a family to live there. Building height was also one that they could have had a 2-story home, and then the height was adopted in such a way that they can really only have a 1-story home. And then the slope setbacks, or kind of how the setbacks work, was also another another standard that was changed that was pretty limiting. And those all three kind of work together in terms of really how much the size of the home. They're intended to address compatibility. I think there are other standards, well, you could still change those standards and address, get at compatibility, get at the same issues of, looming walls and privacy. In terms of the second question is, how could it affect infill, density, livable small lots to help our need with more housing? On one hand, it would have a small effect. There are only 20 of these that we think don't have homes on them, right? So not a big effect. However, when it comes to housing affordability, availability, diversity of type, it's going to take, you've all talked about, it's going to take more than one thing. This isn't the solution. There's not one thing that's a solution. So every little bit helps in this case. So if this gets us 20 more homes for 20 more families, that sounds like a good thing. For context, in 2014, when you were considering allowing new alley access lots, we were only anticipating to get 40 of those in the next 20 years. So that was 2 a year. We haven't seen a lot of development on alley access lots recently, probably because of the limiting standards. So, these aren't, I don't think people are clamoring to build on these or a lot more of these, but again, it's still, I think every little bit probably makes a difference. And then what other areas of the code, such as flag lots, should we consider in response to your recent Measure 49 claim discussions? One thing I just want to point out is that it's been over 5 years since the single-family code amendments were adopted, so you will see no more Measure 49 claims on that package of code amendments, because that's really the window that you have, and those went into effect in, I believe it was August of 2014. So if I did my math right, we're beyond that. We've been looking at this issue for a long time. I mean, through Envision Eugene, there were strategies about expanding housing variety and choice, including smaller homes, clustered homes, attached homes. You initiated an extensive process last year related to housing tools and strategies, which was about availability, affordability, diversity of type of housing. And one of the things that came out of that was a land use code audit that identifies barriers or really ways to facilitate more types of housing. And I really think that is a good starting point for what changes could be made. That looked at, well, I wasn't going to say it, but that looked at ADUs. It looked at duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters. It did actually touch on some of the alley access lot standards. And next, kind of the next major package of land use code amendments related to housing that's going to be coming forward in time is related to House Bill 2001. So we haven't come back to you with what that's going to look like yet. We intend to later this fall, but that is probably probably the package where you may be wanting to look at these types of issues in terms of, what kind of standards can be changed or modified to facilitate more of these smaller housing types while still making sure that they're in alignment with our community values, meaning that we don't have giant looming walls and people aren't peering into every single, nook and cranny. So I just wanted to throw that one out there. And we will be coming back to you again later this fall about our approach for that. And then I am going to leave it at that and leave it for you to discuss. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you. I don't see anyone yet. Oh, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. A great presentation, and a couple of questions. If you create an R1 alley access lot, it's separate from the other lot. It's a new
It's a new
piece
lot.
of land.
Yeah, you have to go through a formal land division and create it separate.
Okay, so that's where it's not like ADUs, because ADUs are still associated with the original lot.
Correct.
This is a whole new lot.
And it can be sold and have a different, right.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Something you said that I think really is significant for me was the notion of this being something in a conversation about smaller housing. So I think the notion of being able to have an alley access lot and then build a fourplex on it, or a triplex or something, is not what I'm looking for. I think that is actually against what I think the concept of having access alley lots available is for. So if I wanted to pursue a conversation about alley access lots, and I think it's a good idea, I would want to figure out a way to have that conversation in such a way that it's not intended to create the maximum amount of, build a fourplex on an 800 square foot piece of land, to me, isn't reasonable. And so that's not what I'm looking for. Within the confines of 2001, I would want to figure out a way to still comply with 2001, but still to be able to achieve what we really want to do to try to preserve the livability while still allowing alley access lots. So I'm back to your original notion of smaller housing. Maybe there is a way that we can provide needed affordable housing, and it may need to be small housing because that's the size that people can afford, and really make it clear that it's not our intention to try to get, to shoehorn fourplexes, triplexes, large housing into these lots. You say there's only 20 of them, so I'm not holding great hope for solving the problem, but I do want to try to support this kind of opportunity as long as it's done in a way that recognizes what the impact it will have. And the impact is for smaller housing, not massive housing, if we're going to go down this road. So I want to make that distinction. I want to do it within conformity to what new state law allows.
Thank you. Claire?
Thank you. So I guess in terms of this work session, the thing that wasn't looking at whether or not or how new alley access lots can be created. That's been a process we've had. It hasn't changed significantly in the last 10 years or whatever.
Right, no, so, I mean, new alley access lots not allowed to be created. I believe the purpose of the work session was to look at the existing standards that apply to the existing lots, which, just for clarification, there's about 66 in the R1 zone, so I suppose somebody could redevelop one, just to clarify.
Okay. So, not surprisingly, I am of the opinion that the 2014 changes were very restrictive, and as with that other topic that shall not be named, it seems like we applied some standards to these that aren't applied to homes built on non-access alley lots, so I just want to kind of verify that. So there's a requirement here that the primary entry shall be defined by a covered or roofed entrance with a minimum roof depth and width of no less than 3 feet. Is that a requirement we have for homes built on non-alley access lots?
It is not.
And a requirement of screening of trash and recycling, is that a requirement we have of homes built on non-alley access lots?
Only for ADUs, so it doesn't apply to your primary.
Primary units?
Yeah.
And then there's the requirement of installation of fire suppression in the house under certain conditions. Is that something we require on homes that are built on non-alley access lots?
Definitely not through the land use code. I can't speak for what the fire code would
regulation.
require. Yeah.
So, I'm of the opinion that we shouldn't be treating these homes differently, except for mitigating the impact that was mentioned about, looming and privacy considerations. And so I'm not sure about the building size, and lot coverage would obviously come into play, but you can have height limitations and setbacks, and if we're going to look at changes here, or if staff's coming back with changes to comply with state law, then for me, considering these other things that seem very pointed to make it very challenging and to prescribe in ways that we don't prescribe for other homes, how these buildings will look or sit on the property is something I would want to see us get rid of.
Emily?
Thank you. For the most part, I agree with Councilor Syrett. I would like to see more housing. I would be okay with making some more alley lots. I think we should look maybe at minimum lot size also. And I think they should be treated same as regular lots, except where they're different. Who's responsible for maintaining and improving alleys? Because I live downtown where there are many alleys, and some of them are not drivable. The holes are huge. Once in a while, there'll be gravel, but they're basically not maintained. So if you have a house on that alley, you have a really hard, you better get a Jeep or something. They don't have sidewalks. What is the width of an alley compared to a regular street? Because they won't have any off-street parking back there. So then we would need on-the-lot parking, whether it's just next to the alley or further in. So I want to let more housing in smaller lots. I think the restrictions for the controversial buildings and these seem to overlap. There's a bunch of similar questions and possible restrictions. And are they smaller than other lots? And I guess if not, then they could also have another building there. So then we would have 2 buildings with cars with no on-street parking. And if they parked on the street, they'd have to go around the block to get into their door. So those are some of my concerns. I'd like to lift restrictions so we could have more housing, but I do want to make sure that quality life is similar living on an alley as on a street, and I see some differences there. So those are some questions I have and concerns. Thank you.
Mike?
Thanks, buddy. Can you answer my question now?
Can you remind me what it is? I'm sorry.
You said that in 2001,
why.
a moratorium was created on this, and I asked, how come?
And I know I looked at this at one point. I believe, and I'll go back and confirm this, but I believe the council discussion was, we want to allow these, but we want to make sure that there are standards to address compatibility.
And we just never went back, council?
Well, we came to you with a planning commission recommendation to do that, and you chose not to at that time.
That was 14 years later, but not,
Correct, not in,
in-between time,
no,
right?
there was nothing in that in-between time.
okay, all right. I do want to, we keep saying this thing, and I want to make sure that we're having adequate conversation about it, because a lot of the members of the public are talking about it too. This is 40 lots, 20 lots. I don't think it's that significant, frankly. But it does lead to what will people do with the lots, and Chris touched on that with regard to housing. Smaller housing being more affordable, because that makes sense. It seems logical. But the truth of the matter is it's just not true. It's not actually so. And the reason is because the cost per square foot to build them makes them actually more expensive to actually rent and or to live in. And it's why I've been kind of a stick in the mud about this, is because I don't think it makes housing more affordable to create more tiny homes. I think it makes it worse. We saw some of that when you're going to build a huge building and have a lot of smaller units in it. And even when you get the savings of scale, the lower priced ones were at the $1,000 to $1,100 a unit end for studios. And that's when you're building lots of them and you got savings and economies of scale. You built one little one. And I would challenge this notion that we only had, 4 ADUs built last year, and what was it? I think you mentioned the other day, Chris, that 7 of them over 3 years or something like that. I don't think I think it's demonstrably not about the regulations as much as it's about the cost. And the way you know that is because if it was about the regulations, we'd have 57 applications and only 7 of them would get through. But when it's about the cost, it's too expensive to build it. It's 15, 20 grand just to get the permit. Plus 60, 70 grand for materials plus labor. You're 80 to 100 grand to build what, 800 square feet? So now you've got debt service on that, and it's going to be $1,200 a month just for borrowing the money. It's not that affordable to build a small home. as easily as we're discussing it. And I think it's important to make sure we're not leading people to that conclusion.
Thank you. Okay, I'm next in the queue. I think that the restrictions that were put in made a lot of sense, and a lot of thought went into them. I thought about livability of the neighbors and thoughts about the strain on the infrastructure too of more close housing. And I think that we shouldn't go lightly into changing restrictions, which were, it's what we seem to be doing lately, that I remember taking forever to decide on something and getting a lot of public input and putting a lot of thought into it. And then now we seem to be just casually saying, raise your hand and change it, as I'm going on the straw poll thing that turned out to be in a proposed ordinance. This is not the way you should make regulations. And the ones we have haven't been working all the time. I know of a place where there's a balcony looking right into someone's bedroom window, and supposedly you can't do that, but it's, if you get too close, if you get houses too close, there are things happen that aren't that good. Did anyone want a second round? We don't have a motion today where this is just information. Manager, would you like to say
I
something?
just want to make sure, I don't know what the next step is, if there's anything, what's the anticipated next step? Or we'll just wait for somebody to propose a motion at some point, or? Which is fine.
I think we got some information,
Okay.
that's good. We know when things happen and some of why they happened. And if there's nothing else, I think the meeting is finished. Is that right?
Okay.
Meeting is adjourned.